You understand
Wow.
that?
Mm-hmm.
And so once you put some of this into context, you'll realize we're dealing with a historical liar. We're dealing with a historical plagiarist. We're still dealing with a historical terrorist, an economic terrorist, a cultural terrorist. And that's a matter of their policy. Their culture is based on an anti-African terrorism economically, psychologically, culturally, and politically. So when we talk about racism, you're talking about this plagiarized being knowing his inferiority to the African being, enforcing his prejudice and envy and jealousy on the African by force. That's racism. How it manifests itself? It manifests itself in every aspect of the American or Western world culture, because it's not just America. The same thing goes on in Germany and England and France and Holland, etc. You know, we live here and America has such a big voice in the world. We think racism is just an American thing, but George Floyd showed you it's not just an American thing. We see it in China and the racism and murderous abuse towards African students and others, merchants who are living there. We see it in Japan. Yet Japan's base population, I knew, were Black people before the Asiatic invaded the Japanese islands, you know? And you can go and find the base population, the original Aborigines of Vietnam were Black, and many of them still live there. Cambodia, the Aborigine were Black, and many of them still live there. Indian, the Aborigine were Black, and millions still lived there before they were invaded by the same Mongolians we call Indians in America. Study history, it will erase the mystery. We are the parent people of the world. Everybody got to live up to our standards, and if they can't, they got to beat us down to theirs. Simple as that. It's not complicated. We get caught up in the methodology of oppression rather than the reason for the oppression. Yes, the methodologies, the movies, the books, the magazines, the music, the school system, the political structuring, all of those things are part of the method used. Hiring practices, the way you measure people taking tests, but those are the methodologies. The reason is envy, jealousy, and inferiority on the part of the non-parent people. The African is the parent people. When the universe first manifested as a human being, it obviously manifested as a Black woman who gave birth to everything else, including the man that would become her man. Nobody can disprove that, you know. That's why I could say we're God having a human experience, because the totality of everything gave birth to itself as a bird at some point. It gave birth to itself as a rose at some point. It gave birth to an aspect of itself, rather, as a human being. And that first time God decided, we can call it any name, Olodumare, Yahweh, or whatever you want to call it, Allah. We're talking about the omnipotent, omnipresent, omnipotent causation and sustainer of the universe. When it manifests as a human, it manifests as a Black woman who became the parent people for every other human in the world. And so we're talking about genetic envy. And then the other thing that Dr. Francis Welsing taught us was that drives the racism, that drives someone using their prejudice to keep you from becoming a legitimate competitor in the marketplace of the world, is the fear, the white man and the white Asians' fear of genetic annihilation. That Black penis is very powerful, and so is the Black womb. So you go jump off in there, or let it jump off in you, and then you're gonna disappear. Okay? Wow. That was a simple way to put it and get right to the point.
Yeah.
And Dr. Welsing told us the fear of genetic annihilation and the envy and the jealousy coming out of the inferiority towards the parent people is what drives racism. Beyond the obvious of, I don't want you to be a competitor, because you will outcompete me. So I can't let you play on a level field, because just being who you are when given the opportunity, you soar to the top in everything I do. And that's proven in our history all over the Western world. And
So true.
inventions and science and technology and sports and education. Give us the chance and see where we arrive.